Hello Internet, Taliesin here, and today we are talking Ny'alotha, the Waking City. We are talking Wrathion, we are talking Xalatath, the Blade of the Black Empire. We are talking the climactic battle with Ny'alotha, the final old god, and of course we are talking about the conclusion of Battle for Azeroth. Because the new raid, the last raid of the expansion, is here. The ending cinematics and cutscenes have been consumed greedily by the world, and opinions given. And opinions have been given, which is very unusual for WoW. Usually most people are content just to keep their views to themselves. And as usual in this situation, we are going to hunker down and get into them in a proper deep dive, even if this episode is a little bit different from our previous installments, quite simply because, well, so is the ending. And so, usual disclaimer, this is not a reaction video, okay? I have watched all of this stuff and thought about it a lot since it hit, and if you haven't seen any of this, then obviously it's going to spoil absolutely everything about the ending of the Ny'alotha raid, but also, this video will be a terrible way of watching it, because we're going to be stopping, and starting, going back or forward, and generally just talking all over the top and having a tentacly old time with them. So with that in mind, join us as we ask, what even just happened? Where is Ny'alotha? What is his legacy? And did Blizzard just drop a big old bollock in their choice of story delivery for Ny'alotha? Okay? Go, 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 go. So I think in order to totally understand what's going on here, you need to know a thing or two about what's been happening in the raid up to this point. And the raid footage that you're going to see now is from Squishei's stream for Wowhead, which he's kindly given us permission to use. There's a link in the description below. He is always the first to play through and get the cinematics when a new raid drops. Check him out, seriously. So battling through Ny'alotha and not going totally insane like we should do because we're wearing our snazzy insanity resisting legendary cloaks, thanks Wrathion, we are laying down beacons at various points throughout the raid so that Magni and Mother back in the Chamber of the Heart can pinpoint Ny'alotha's exact location, get a bead on him, and zap him with the power of the re-origination array, the very forge that Ny'alotha was attempting to gain control of to corrupt the whole of Azeroth and bring about the return of the Black Empire. And just to quickly answer a question that I've seen people asking about this, that question being, why didn't the Titans do that in the first place instead of imprisoning the old gods? Which is a fair question, but the answer is actually very simple. At the time that the Titans were here, Ny'alotha and the other old gods were very much physically burrowed into the planet. That's why killing Y'Shaarj by ripping him out of the planet's surface created the open gaping wound of the Well of Existence. Since being released though in 8.2, Ny'alotha has escaped to Ny'alotha to enact his plans, which is a different physical plane to Azeroth. Basically, it's safe to kill him there because he is no longer burrowed into the heart of the planet. It's also why we can use the re-origination array on him without fear of accidentally re-originating the whole of Azeroth, because he's not actually on Azeroth. Although maybe some part of him is on Azeroth somewhere though, I'm just saying. Remember that like 3-hour quest line you did at the beginning of 8.3 last week? That's the story that these quests were giving you. Anyway, as part of our progress, killing bosses and trash, so much trash, and laying these beacons, we come across High Inquisitor Zanesh, who is doing an absolute number on a bound, tortured Queen Azshara. When we kill Zanesh and free Azshara, she gives us the Blade of the Black Empire together again, and tells us that she was planning to use it to kill Ny'alotha herself. But you know, we should totally do it now since we are clearly more badass. And I know what you're thinking. You're thinking, A, how does she have the Blade of the Black Empire? The last we saw of it, Nathanos was carrying it away into the sea in 8.2. We supposedly get an answer for that later. You're thinking, B, is she telling the truth about her plan to kill Ny'alotha, or is it a blatant lie to save her own skin? It's her fault that Ny'alotha is even free, of course, and kind of ours as well, but let's ignore that. It certainly seems a bit convenient. And it's impossible to tell, obviously, but it does say in the Dungeon Journal that Inquisitor Zanesh specializes in breaking those who have managed to resist the old god's whispers, which would suggest that Azshara had resisted the old god's whispers, and therefore not really doing what she was told, and that, okay, maybe she is telling the truth. And you're thinking, C, most important, why did no one take the Blade of the Black Empire off of Azshara during the whole torture thing? And if she was hiding it, where was she hiding it? Because Azshara doesn't wear many clothes and none of them have pockets, just saying. But the upshot is that Wrathion is now in possession of the Blade of the Black Empire as we make our way to the Carapace of Ny'alotha, which is that boss fight with the awesome skybox of Ny'alotha just looming over us. And it's where we hit a snag, because we can't zap Ny'alotha with the re-origination array while he's protected by his Carapace. And at this point, Wrathion steps up.
To use the chamber's weapons against Ny'alotha, we need to get inside his husk. Leave this part to me. After all, dramatic entrances are my specialty.
And thus begins the first cinematic of the raid. And we begin with this establishing shot of the carapace itself, which I love, surrounded as it is by an assault course of limbs guarding the way. Now, something this raid, and in fact this entire patch, has no shortage of, is tentacles. When we look back on BFA in years to come, I don't think anyone is going to be saying, I think the thing that really let that expansion down was there weren't enough tentacles. We are good for tentacles, all told, but these may be my favourite tentacles in the expansion so far. They really capture that Lovecraftian vibe for me, the thick, gargantuan, fleshy, slow-moving horror of it all. Really great. And the score adds to that sickening feeling too, with its classic horror movie rising discordant strings. As in the foreground, Wrathion's impressively curly-toed boot stomps defiantly into shot in a manner which suggests that this is a character about to make his stand. Ny'alotha is, after all, the old god that corrupted his father and grandfather, Deathwing, and whose biggest fear is to fall prey to the same corruption that his father and grandfather did. A fear that might well be even more prominent in the mind right now, since we fought a corrupted Wrathion at the very beginning of this raid, even if that did turn out just to be a vision. And what I love about this current iteration of Wrathion is that he's a lot more playful than we knew in Mists. You feel that this is a Wrathion who is a lot more sure of his own strength and purpose, and that allows him this very mischievous, almost dandy quality to his animations, which I adore. So despite how important this moment is, and how it's the culmination of pretty much Wrathion's entire story arc up to this point, there's still time for a bit of showing off. Tossing the dagger up into the air to add a bit of flourish to the proceedings with that cocky smirk on his face, which should be annoying, but actually just makes me totally love him more. And as he jumps out of the frame here, I just want to point out the backdrop, because this is something I think we really miss out on by not having Ny'alotha as a full zone instead of just a raid. Look how vast and empty Ny'alotha looks here. That sense of massive size and scale is just how I imagine an old god realm. It's something that Argus managed to capture really well with its zone backdrops, and I would love to have had the opportunity to explore these areas myself in game. But anyway. There's this glorious transition into his true dragon form. Again, defiantly uncorrupted by Ny'alotha's influence. His very existence here is like a middle finger being raised to the old god. And I know what you're thinking. You're thinking, but Taliesin, where's the Blade of the Black Empire gone now? Because Dragon Wrathion isn't wearing any clothes and he has 0 pockets. And you're absolutely right, of course, but I'm going to choose not to think about that, or at least not in public. And as he takes on that assault course of tentacles, we have a shot which I think is unlike any that we've seen in one of these cinematics before. This shuddering handheld follow of the dragon as he swoops and dives under, over and around the massive swinging slabs of flesh that are trying to swat him like a fly. The relative tininess and fragility of this huge black dragon, emphasizing just how gargantuan these tentacles are, until they inevitably squish him like a gnat. Only for this awesome reveal of humanoid, fully dressed Wrathion hurtling through the air to his target. And I've read a lot of people compare this online to Arya Stark killing the King of the White Walkers in Game of Thrones, which, yeah, I guess, if you like, but the sentiment for me is much more like Ant-Man, to be honest. Wrathion switched to his smaller form at just the moment when being a dragon would have meant his death. He literally gets smaller to avoid the danger. And it's this clever utilization of both dragon and human forms that wins the day here. Just being a massive badass dragon was not enough, and I think that's a really cool thing to show, especially given Wrathion's very close and special friendship to a human. It is also, of course, reminiscent of how Varian Rin, the man that Anduin blamed Wrathion for the death of in just the last cinematic, dropping from the warship to take out the Fel Reaver and save his troops at the Broken Shore. And as Wrathion connects with the carapace, we begin the first of 3 successive shots of eyes. First, this with all the opened eyes of Ny'alotha going crazy like they just put a fork in a plug socket, and then we see the full power of Naifu as the thick torrents of void energy spurt like an artery from Ny'alotha's shell, and the eye of the Blade of the Black Empire crackles and glows. And is that Is that voidy power flowing into the dagger? Is it consuming the essence of the old god? Because we know it can. And then the narrowed eyes of the son and grandson of Deathwing, teeth gritted, exacting revenge for millennia of pain inflicted on his family by this being. Ny'alotha likes to talk about the completing of the circle. Well, here is something that really is coming full circle. And as the pressure builds to the point that void energy erupts and Wrathion is thrown a huge distance back, he looks at his hand to see that the blade has disintegrated, overcharged by the sheer force of the old god's power flowing through it. And just for a second, we're reminded of Anduin looking at his hand in the Legion epilogue as he held Azerite for the first time, or in the last cinematic as he sensed N'Zoth's influence take hold. And in that second, we're worried for Wrathion. Before that familiar smirk returns, because this plan has totally worked. And as the final shot shows us, Blade did its job. The way is clear, and there is a big old monster to fight en route to the main event. And actually, I compared Wrathion leaping into the carapace to Varian with the Fel Reaver. A nice little juxtapose there. At the Broken Shore, Varian blew up, and his weapon survived to be found by Anduin later. Here, Wrathion survives, and his weapon blows up instead. A much more sensible way of doing things. Try that next time, okay, Varian? And I know what you're thinking. You're thinking, hang on, Taliesin, didn't you totally predict that Wrathion would stab N'Zoth with the Blade of the Black Empire? I think the end cinematic is going to be Wrathion jumping in and kill-stealing by stabbing, doing the stabby-stabby on N'Zoth with the Blade of the Black Empire with Xalatath.
Nice.
Yeah, I did, but in fairness, I thought it was going to be the very end cinematic. Something that we still have to look forward to here. But yeah, the answer is I was right. But it's no big deal, you know? I don't even know why you brought it up. This is an awesome action cinematic. It does exactly what it's supposed to do. When I saw this live, I was like, oh yeah, boy, Blizz are nailing this raid. And I was hype for that final cinematic. So let's move on to the final cinematic, because there's just time for one more sassy one-liner from Wrathion.
Angry, are we? And after I tried so hard to impress you with my dagger handiwork.
Before he totally nopes out of actually fighting N'Zoth, which is probably wise given recent corrupting vision events. And with the carapace of N'Zoth defeated, one quick boss fight later, we head to the final showdown with his true form. In a fight which is kind of nuts, which begins with players' souls being ripped from their bodies to be recovered later, building-sized tentacles thumping around, and reveals. Like when N'Zoth shows us mid-fight the scene between Sylvanas and Ashara where they make a deal. The Blade of the Black Empire in return for Ashara killing all of us heroes for Sylvanas in a scene which, again, may or may not be true, but which certainly makes sense and could be true. In that vision, Ashara says to herself of Sylvanas, "Do you think I am blind to the darkness which you seek to unleash?" Clearly meaning all that shit that's coming up in Shadowlands with the Jailer. And N'Zoth says, "Only I can save this world." You know what? Maybe he's right. Towards the end of the fight, as Magni and Mother are desperately trying to get a lock on the old god to, actually do the plan that we're all here to do, N'Zoth bridges dimensions, creating an opening directly to the Chamber of the Heart. And we've been tricked again. Once again, we've basically brought N'Zoth exactly what he needed and put it on a plate for him, which when you think about it, isn't completely surprising since I am, after all, a proud follower of N'Zoth and would do anything for my glorious tentacly daddy. And much like in the Wrath of the Lich King fight at Icecrown, we lose. N'Zoth succeeds in overpowering us, we succumb to his whispers and influence, and the whole raid begins to zombie walk into the ravenous, fleshy maw. And as you may have heard already, this ending cinematic is a little bit different, because the majority of it takes the form of an in-game cutscene, which has proven controversial. And of course, we are going to talk about all of that as part of the analysis, but first let's work through the cutscene and cinematic on their own terms. So, as the whole raid succumb to the old god and start cosplaying as shadow priests, and with the way to the Chamber of the Heart open and clear, consuming our very bodies to give him the power to access it, boosted as they are by the lifeblood of the Titan World Soul that N'Zoth is about to corrupt, completing his very reason for existence, when all seems completely lost, and the camera very explicitly shows your character helplessly about to be consumed forever However, Magni makes one more desperate plea to us to resist.
Don't listen to his lies! You don't belong to him! You're a child of Azeroth! Her strength is your strength!
And these words are enough to cut through, because they're true, not in a vague, philosophical way. Azeroth's strength literally is our strength. Strength that we've spent the last year and a half collecting from world quests, islands, warfronts, chests, rares, weeklies, raid bosses. We've done a lot of Azerite farming, okay? And this is the moment where it all pays off. Yes, even more than unlocking rings on your Azerite armor, I know. Because, yeah, I'm sure your character being a total badass has something to do with your ability to resist the will of N'alotha. But the blue and gold explosion of Azerite power that clears the void corruption suggests that the Heart of Azeroth might have something to do with it.
New anchor point acquired.
Well then, what are you waiting for?
Acknowledged. Firing sequence initiated.
And I think this is actually really cool. Our Heart of Azeroth is now working as an anchor point for the Forge. Our necklace is the final beacon that Mother needs to get that bead on N'alotha. And at the very last moment, they are able to get their shot, their one shot, away. And I've seen a lot of people online compare this next bit to Dragon Ball Z, and it's obvious why. But you know what I thought when I saw this? I thought Death Star. The music is even very noticeably Star Wars-like at this moment. And I don't know for certain, but I wouldn't be surprised if Ny'alotha was responsible for all this. Power of the Forge of Origination zaps out from the 4 different points and converges on your Heart of Azeroth, using it as a focus to unload into the face of N'alotha. And there's a lot that I like here. I like that the whole reason N'alotha exists is to corrupt the world soul of Azeroth. And his defeat comes through the power of the world soul herself. It's kind of like that cliche in action movies where the female romantic lead who's rubbish at fighting is captured by the baddie, but then at the end when she escapes, she's the one that sticks it to him with a knife or something for the final blow, just when he's about to kill Sylvester Stallone or whatever. The victim becoming the one who's in control. And in fact, for a complete table turn, the Titan World Soul is actually the one that goes on to then corrupt Ny'alotha. That table is so turned right now. And before we move on to that rendered cutscene bit of this story, I just want to point out the music again at the end of this in-game cutscene, because I don't know if you noticed, it's the same refrain that plays at the end of the BFA announcement trailer. Bringing yet another circle to a close, we end this story symbolically, musically at least, where we began, with that motif. And then we do have a very short sequence depicting that world soul energy corrupting, although purging is probably the better term, the awakened city, and indeed, plane of existence of Ny'alotha. Overloading N'alotha himself, kind of cracking him open from inside, and the fall of the monoliths and temples of the Black Empire. And yes, as many of you big brain IQ 300 internet folks have pointed out, this is clearly an homage to the end of Return of the King. And it's definitely not accidental, because I got news for you, team. Old gods having similarities to Sauron is not a new thing, okay? It's been going on since vanilla, to the extent that I actually read this blatant recreation of the end of the Lord of the Rings as an explicit closing of a chapter of old god stuff in WoW that began in vanilla with Cthulhu. I think we are very specifically being told something here. And as those eyes, all of which were opened, albeit just for one patch, explode with beams of Azerite energy spewing from them, you know, they actually look a whole lot more like our Heart of Azeroth than old god appendages, don't they? The Black Empire crumbles, the tentacles evaporate into that familiar purple smoke. It would appear that the battle has been won, and for the time being at least, the fight against the corrupting forces of the old gods has been won. Close scene, see you in Shadowlands. And the big question here is Is this an acceptably grand ending for the final raid in the final patch of an expansion? Many people are making their feelings known on all of this online, as you'd imagine, and we're going to be looking more at the community reaction in the next episode of the Weekly Reset, as well as addressing the whole did we deal with Ny'alotha too quickly thing, because here I just want to look at the cinematics themselves. The Wrathion one is obviously brilliant, but what about that final ending? Was that a fitting end to an expansion? Well, no. Certainly not compared to the heights that we've come to expect in the last, actually probably 5 expansions. And I'm going to agree with the majority here in that I found it a little bit underwhelming, if only because Blizzard's own stratospheric standards in past ending cinematics, and indeed every other cinematic this expansion, have set expectations at a certain level, which this didn't quite reach. First, let me say what I liked about it. I really like how the use of an in-game cutscene allows it to be specifically my character who defeats Ny'alotha, because that's something that has never happened in a raid cinematic before. I like how all of the other actual characters in the raid are also depicted and are all totally useless and I save their ass, something that I'm very used to being a healer, obviously, but it's good to see that finally recognized. I like that it makes our Heart of Azeroth incredibly important, showing us that there was a reason we spent all that time filling it with Azerite. I like the payoff of that. Some people have compared it to the ending of the Dragon Soul raid because Ny'alotha gets zapped with a Titan laser. But I would argue that this is very deliberately a response to the criticisms of that cinematic, where the big meme has always been that we do all the fighting and then Thrall jumps in and kills Steels. Well, here is our character doing it. What I'm saying is I can totally see why they chose to present this in the form of an in-game cutscene. I actually think it's a pretty good idea, and I think they did the right thing in cutting from that straight into a rendered cinematic. So actually, my problem isn't with the in-game cutscene at all, really, nor with anything in the rendered cinematic. It's that there wasn't enough in that rendered clip. Ny'alotha collapsing in on itself really should have just been the start. What we needed was some character closure here. Velen's relieved sigh at the end of Legion is so brilliant, so effective, because it represents closure for his character and by extension for us. An image of Wrathion watching the towers of Ny'alotha fall with a similar sense of a life's work being completed would have been really effective. Anduin and Thrall watching as the void corruption disappears from Stormwind and Orgrimmar could have given us a great connection to other places that Ny'alotha has touched in this patch. Maybe just the slightest hint at the end that there are still old gods, or Ny'alotha himself out there somehow as a cool ending. I feel like Blizz try and do a lot of this with another in-game cutscene in the Chamber of the Heart when you hand in the Killing Ny'alotha quest, but again it falls flat because at that stage you just need the kind of cool rendered cinematic that we are so used to in BFA, because that's what we have been trained to associate with storylines ending in this expansion, and so when we don't get it, it feels weird and incomplete. There's nothing wrong with what's there, it just needed more personal closure than some towers falling down, which, let's be honest, is cool, but is kind of like the equivalent of some fireworks spelling out congratulations in the sky as far as uninspiring endings go. And like I say, much as I can see why Blizzard chose to go with the IGCS for Killing Ny'alotha, and I like it now, I'm going to like it even more when it's my character in there doing it, I'm sure. I can't believe that no one in Blizzard didn't say, okay, that is a really cool idea, let's do it, but for the love of God, let's make sure there's a full-length rendered cinematic straight afterwards, because if there's not, no one's going to care how good this cutscene is, they'll all be too busy totally crucifying us, which is exactly what happened. And if no one did say that, that's a little bit naive, really, isn't it? BFA has had more cinematics than any other expansion, by far. In the Saurfang series, they reached a quality that I don't think anyone could have predicted before the expansion began. I'm always going to remember BFA cinematics as being the best in the game overall up till this point, and I'd love to have seen that totally exemplified and capped off with this. There is a lot that I like about the ending of Ny'alotha, but I just needed more. We needed a Velen's sigh. But what do you think, guys? Was this a fitting end to the expansion and to Ny'alotha? Were you disappointed with the decisions that Blizzard made? Let us know in the comments below. But like I say, we'll be talking a lot more about this in the Weekly Reset, but if you enjoyed this episode, don't thank us. Thank our patrons who give their actual real-life money to make all of our videos happen. Thank you, guys. You are totes the best, and you know it. If you didn't like it, downvote the shit out of it. Remember, my name is Squishei. No, my name is Taliesin from me and Evitel. Until next time, cheerio.